All right, here we're going to take a look at calculating out the journal entry that we need to do for bad debt expense. And we are going to use the aging schedule to be able to do this. And so here we have ABC Company and the aging of accounts receivable. And the date is also in our heading. And so we're going to say April 30th of 2021 is our date. So what we're taking a look at is all the amounts that customers owe us and how much past due those amounts are as of April 30th. And so here we have 5 different customers listed here. We have an invoice date. Now, one of the first things that we're going to have to figure out is what would be the due date for those invoice dates, because we have to separate out these amounts into how much past due. Are they 0 to 30 days past due? Are they 31 to 60 days past due? Or are they 61 and over days past due? So we have to know, well, when were they due in the first place to be able to see how many days past due these amounts are. So let's go through and do that. For A. Adams, the invoice date was March 18th of 2021. Now there's 2 different ways that companies might calculate out the due date. Let us say that the policy for the store is net 30. Okay, so these are due within 30 days. Now there's 2 ways, like I say, that this could be calculated. One is to calculate out the exact number of days. And so the exact 30 days from March 18th, when would that be? The other possibility is the old-fashioned way, which is to consider that every month is 30 days, and so 30 days exactly, so that 30 days after March 18th would be considered the same day on the next month, April 18th. For purposes of our accounting class, we can use that. It just saves you a little bit of time. Okay, so we'll say that that is April 18th. And that B. Booker, which was the invoice date, was on March the 10th. And so the date that it's due is going to be April the 10th. C. Conley was, the invoice date was January the 20th. And so it was due February the 20th. And D. Davis, the invoice date is April 15th, and so it is not due until May the 15th. And E. Ellis, the invoice date was April the 10th, and so that is due on May the 10th. Okay, so now we've calculated out the due date for each of these. Now I have to say how many days past due is each one of these. And so the first one, A. Adams, was due on April 18th. This aging schedule is for April 30th. So we are, as of April 30th, Adam still owes us $1,000. So how many days past due are they? Well, that means they were due on the 18th and it's now the 30th. So that number of days is how many days past due they were. So if we take April has 30 days and we subtract, so if we have 30 days are in April and we subtract the day that it was due, the 18th, that tells us how many days there are left in April, which is 12. Okay, so they are 12 days past due. So that is in the 0 to 30 category. And I will go ahead and put the $1,000 in the 0 to 30 days past due category. Let's take a look at the next one. B. Booker was due on the 10th of April. And now we're looking at the 30th. Okay, so we take 30 days in April, we subtract out the 10th, that tells us how many days are left in April, and that would be 20 days. So they are 20 days past due. Okay, $800, 20 days past due. 20 days fits in the 0 to 30. So we have 800 goes in that column. Okay, now we have C. Conley. Okay, that was due on February 20th. Okay, and so February 20th, how many days past due is that? Okay, so first, we take how many days are there in February, which is 28. We subtract out the day it was due, which was the 20th. Okay, so that means there was 8 days left in February. Plus March, all of March, which was 31 days, and all of April, which is 30 days. So if I total that up, the 8 days from February plus the 31 days of March and the 30 days of April, so that is 69 days past due. Okay, so that will go in this final column, the 61 plus days. And that 500 goes there. Now, these last two are not even due yet. As of April 30th, they're not due yet. So they are 0 days past due. All right. Then we're going to add up each column. And so we have the first column is one. That would be 5,300. The second column is 0, and the third column is 500. Okay, what we're going to say is that each one of these, anything that's between 0 and 30 days past due is more likely that we're actually going to receive that money. Less likely that that they won't ever pay us. Even those that are a little bit slow, we're more than likely to see that money. Whereas those that are more than 61 days past due are kind of likely that we might not see the light of day, that money. So you're going to be told how much percentage for each one of these. So let's say the 0 to 30 days is 2% chance, oopsie, 2% chance of being bad. And let's say the 31 to 60 days is 10%. And let's say if it's over 61 days, we believe that'll be 25%. Okay, so you would be told that in the problem. All right, so the 0 to the 30 days is 5,300, and we're going to multiply that times 2%, which is 0.02. We'll multiply anything in the 31 to 60 days by the 10%, which is 0.1. And we'll multiply anything in the 61 and over past due times the 25%, which is 0.25. Okay, so in our, we have 5,300 in our 0 to 30 column, and we're going to multiply that 5,300 times 0.02, and we're going to get 106. And in this 31 to 60, we don't have anything there, so 0 times 0.1 is 0. And in the 61 and over, we have $500 times 0.25, and so that's 125. All right, now before we can do our journal entry, we have to know how much is in the oopsie. How much is in the account, in the allowance account? Okay, now our grand total here of the bad debts we think we're going to have is 106 plus 0 plus 125. So if I have 106 and 0 and 125, that's $231. In other words, we think from having analyzed all the customers and what they owe us and how long we've been waiting for the money, that there's going to be, out of this $5,800 that customers owe us, that $231 we're never going to see. We think that's the most likely situation. Now, if we had accounts receivable, that's going to be a debit balance of course, 5,800. We already know that. Okay. And put it in this DR. Okay. It's a debit balance. We already know it's 5,800. We already know that accounts receivable is going to be a debit balance. Okay. Hey! And we have the allowance for bad debts, that's going to be a credit balance. It's an contra asset account attached at the hip to accounts receivable, but typically has a credit balance. Now, it doesn't always have to have a debit balance, a credit balance. It may have a debit balance if we have written off something and it ended up getting repaid or whatever. Some different things might happen that cause this allowance account to be a debit balance instead of credit. So that can happen. It is more typically a credit balance. Okay, and so let's say it was a credit balance of $100. Okay, now what do we need to do? We're saying that $231 is how much is bad. So we want this allowance for bad debts to equal $231 credit, but right now it's credit of 100. So what do we need to do? We're going to need to credit allowance for bad debts. We're going to need to credit that by $131. So we're going to need to debit bad debts expense for 131. And we'll credit the allowance for bad debts, 131. To record bad debts for April 30th. Okay, so in other words, we're going to debit bad debts expense for $131, not for the whole $231. Okay, because out of that $231, 100 was already estimated from last month and is still sitting there. So we only need to make sure there's another 131 added to it. Then once I post this credit of 131 into the allowance account that already has a credit of 100, I will end up with a balance of 231, which is what I want. Okay, what if we have an allowance for bad debts and it has a debit balance of 100. Okay, what do I do then? Okay, so in that case, it's a debit of 100 and I need to get all the way to a credit of 231. So I'm going to have to debit bad debt expense for 331 and credit, 331 and credit allowance for bad debts 331 instead of the 131, because we have to go all the way from a debit of 100 to having a balance of credit of 231. So once I credit this 331 to the allowance account that has a debit of 100, by the time I post that 331 credit, then I will finally have a credit balance of 231. So in other words, the whole point is to have a credit balance of the total